The video game genre consisting of smashing buttons and landing the most stylish combos is well versed in modern games and has evolved into its own genre called hack and slash. But how did this genre start out in the beginning, and how is it holding up to this day? Let's first take a look at how this genre started out. The first hack and slash game traces back all the way to July 1985 and, additionally, to Konami. Ever since the studio was founded in March 1969 in Osaka, Japan by Kagemasa Kosuke, it has always been very present in the arcade game scene and has already published well-known and popular games such as Frogger, Scramble or Time Pilot. Anyways, in 1985 Konami decided to make a game that was different from anything they had created before, Russian Attack. Originally, this hack and slash game was made for arcades but was later ported to the NES and computers. In this game, set during the Cold War, you play as United States Special Operations Green Berets and try to rescue prisoners of war from an enemy military base. Fitting to this vibe, the game is often referred to as Russian Attack, which is an intended pun for the translated version of the name. As you can see, it is a game that looks pretty much like a classic arcade title from this time period. And naturally, it comes with the common flaws it's bound to have. The combat is stiff and simple, the levels are rather short, and the difficulty is very punishing, which, as we all know, isn't an issue if the game is good enough. After all, despite its issues and the serious tone that screams about as much fun as a League of Legends solo queue, it's generally on the liked side and mostly well received. Moving on to the next big hack and slash game, we have Golden Axe. This game, made by Sega, the studio behind previous hit games such as Outrun or Afterburner, released in January of 1989 and was apparently so popular that it was followed up with multiple games from the same franchise. Golden Axe elevates the hack and slash genre away from Russian Attack's real war setting and instead focuses on a fantasy setting with the classic idea of heroes defeating an evil antagonist. The antagonist in this game is called Death Adder, and unfortunately he had to fight the fire giant and was so mad that he killed the brother of one of the protagonists, as well as the mother of another protagonist, as well as both parents of the third protagonist. In fact, he was so mad after finding out which boss he had to fight after the fire giant that he decided to take over the entire land of Uria. In terms of gameplay, Golden Axe still looks like a classic arcade game, but with a bit more personality. It feels like a clear step up from Russian Attack, but it's ultimately not too far off. The biggest difference is that you don't progress through levels in the classic way and instead clear out enemy waves until not a single one is left on your screen. Even though combos aren't really a thing, the possibility to chain attacks is now present. What makes Golden Axe so special is the opportunity to play co-op with your friends, if you have them. Now, after getting these prehistoric games out of the way, we can move on to the good stuff. And with the good, I mean the best. The one and only Devil May Cry is a series consisting of absolutely amazing games, and Devil May Cry 2 as well. It's Capcom's second most loved child, and it would maybe even be first, but there's another child sucking up everything they've got. Devil May Cry 1 released in 2001 and was, since its release, one of the biggest and most popular games of that time period. Over 2 million copies of DMC1 were sold in 2001, making it a big success worldwide. The fact that the silly idea of going overboard with too much action led us to having this masterpiece of a game. Let me explain. In 1999, Capcom started developing the next entry for the Resident Evil franchise under Hideki Kamiya's direction. At that point, only a prototype of the game, later supposed to be Resident Evil 4, was finished. And the most memorable thing about it was that Leon Kennedy was not the main character. In fact, it was a brand new character that had never appeared in Resident Evil before, Tony Redgrave. This Resident Evil entry had a heavy focus on action and melee combat, which clashed with the actual idea behind Resident Evil being a survival horror game series. Capcom ultimately came to the same conclusion. Therefore, this prototype was cancelled as a Resident Evil entry and instead became what we today know as Devil May Cry, with Tony Redgrave evolving into the Dante we know today. So what is Devil May Cry even about? In Devil May Cry there are two important factions, humans and devils. The main character Dante, being half human half devil, is the product of a human woman and a devil getting freaky. So in DMC1, the plot revolves around the demon emperor Mundus, who is also the one who killed Dante's parents. A woman named Trish, who looks almost identical to Dante's mother, hires Dante to defeat Mundus before he can return to the human world and cause chaos. What feels so special about Devil May Cry for me isn't tied to gameplay alone, even though you could argue that some elements such as the big variety of different weapons are fun. Devil May Cry is special to me because of its unique vibe and aesthetic. This gothic setting with demons, action and a banger OST together with Trish's twin moons is just perfect. It perfectly encapsulates the early 2000s vibe, which is generally loved a lot, and I could not agree more. That said, this DMC game is not the one that does this the best, but we will get to that later. But you know what they say, one at the peak must go to the very depths of hell. I don't think anyone ever said that, but it's whatever. Devil May Cry 2 is dog shit. And I don't mean that in a way where people just hop on a trend to say something is bad like they do with Dark Souls 2, which is a good fucking game and a masterpiece, don't let the ops fool you. No, Devil May Cry is genuinely a bad game. But how did it come to this failure of a game? The game started production shortly after DMC1's release in the summer of 2001. Rather than the original Devil May Cry team, a different Capcom team was put on the project for some odd reason, which led to them scraping the project midway through development. Roughly 6 months before the game's release, Capcom put director Hideaki Itsuno on the project, who would later direct DMC 3, 4 and 5. In short, they put him there to save the game before it could die even prior to its release. So in January of 2003, DMC 2 released and it was mostly disappointing. Not as bad as it's received today, but still far worse than Devil May Cry 1. Basically, everything in this game sucks. From enemies to areas to mechanics and boss fights. It's all just one big mess of a game, really. So what did this game even do for the franchise? Surely it pushed the story forward, right? So DMC2's story is barely a story at all. The antagonist is called Arius, who is a demon but also a businessman, and he wants world domination, immortality, and to revive an ancient demon called Argosex. The only two mentionable characters are Dante and Lucia. Dante is weird. He barely talks and just kind of seems edgy, I guess. In fact, the amount of memorable voice lines Dante speaks in this game barely reaches double digits. Lucia is questioning her existence, I guess. Not a bad concept, but bro is not Nier Automata. I should also mention that the story can be written off completely as filler, as you don't need to play the game at all to follow the overall story. Actually, that's even saying too much, because everything in this game stays in this game and is never mentioned again in the entirety of the Devil May Cry franchise. While Capcom fumbled with DMC2, something big was happening over at Square Enix in the same year. The legend Yoko Taro unleashed the first Drakengard onto the world. Just like the Nier games, which we will get to later, this game has a very interesting and philosophical way of writing its stories and characters. However, even though I consider myself a hardcore fan of Nier Automata, I can't even begin to imagine doing that game justice, because my ability to properly express what I think and feel about it is simply not good enough. Given this, I won't be going too deep into Drakengard as I haven't played it myself and want to avoid doing the game dirty in any way out of respect for the series. Anyways, this game leans very heavily into the fantasy side of things. Instead of just being cool like Devil May Cry, it explores some deep and dark themes, which is a common and recurring thing for Yoko Taro to do. The gameplay, however, is pretty bad from the feedback I can find online. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't play Drakengard, but from what I've gathered, the camera is abysmal and there are no real combos, so the gameplay lacks depth. Now, whether or not I actually stand behind these opinions, I can't really tell yet, but maybe I'll get to this in the future. Now, besides the fact that Drakengard directly leads to the events of Nier, which is really cool, I also came across Drakengard's ending E, which is a direct reference to the end of Evangelion, and yeah, I can definitely see that.
Is this the land of the gods?
Now we reach peak again, and it's not going to be the last time either, but finally we arrive at 2005 and with that Devil May Cry 3.
Let's rock!
DMC3 is chronologically the first game, and if you ask me, also one of the best in the series together with DMC5. This game really is something. Not only is the gameplay absolute fun and diverse, but the vibe is unmatched by anything else. It's still gothic like DMC usually is, but this time it's even more early 2000s edgy rock if that makes any sense. Dante is way less serious while still keeping the usual edge factor, and personally, this really is peak Dante. Not only is the vibe perfect, but the story is really good too. Basically, a massive demon tower appears, which is the work of both Arkham, the villain of this game, and Dante's brother Virgil, who is also a villain here. Your goal is to climb the tower and stop it from opening the gates to the demon world. Also, Lady is in this game too, and she's goated unlike her counterpart from the new Netflix anime, which we do not talk about. I think DMC3 did a lot for the series. Not only is it generally considered one of, if not the best entry in the franchise, but it also saved the entire series after the disaster that was DMC2. And if you find it hard to get into old clunky games like Devil May Cry 1, you might want to start with DMC3 instead, since it feels a lot better to play and is chronologically the first one anyway, so it'll all make sense. Skipping ahead to 2008, we have, you might have guessed it, another Devil May Cry. DMC4, even though it's usually seen as mixed or rather positive, it's still a lot more controversial than Devil May Cry 3. This game takes place after the events of DMC 1, 2 and 3. I mean, as you know, DMC 2 did not do shit for this franchise. And you play a newly introduced character, Nero. Nero is the son of Virgil and some random ass woman, and he's kind of like a young version of Dante if he swapped out the goofy nature for way too much seriousness. The story is really solid. Like usual, it's evil demons trying to do evil things. This time though, we have a bit of a plot twist revolving around the church. What's also interesting is that the first actual boss fight is against Dante himself, who is portrayed as the villain. Obviously he isn't, but Nero doesn't know that. It's a really fresh story and it steps away from the familiar settings of DMC 1, 2 and 3, modernizing the world a bit. Also, this cutscene is very crucial for the plot, so I'll just leave it here. Gameplay wise, this game feels like a modern, smooth Devil May Cry 3, but introduces Nero's Devilbringer as a new mechanic. This arm functions as a grab and, well, everything else that's just cool as fuck. Hopefully I get to use this a lot in Devil May Cry 5 too. I love my Devilbringer. I hope nothing happens to it. I hope it's kept safe. So overall, this game is really good and fun. Until you get to play Dante. You have to do all the same stuff you just did with Nero, like the same bosses, and don't even get me started on this fucking board game. It was like 2 years ago that I played this game and this level still haunts me. It will not let me rest peacefully ever again in my lifetime. Anyways, a year later in 2009 we got Bayonetta. This game feels quite similar to Devil May Cry, especially capturing that church and demons vibe from DMC4, since it uses angels and demons a lot. The main character is called Bayonetta. Who would have guessed? She's hot as hell and basically that's all you need to know. Also her hair magic doubles as clothing, so yeah, she's naked a lot. Bayonetta's apparently so hot that she fell asleep for like 500 years, and now she wakes up and tries to discover her past. The gameplay is everything you could want from a relatively modern hack and slash game, with the glorious introduction of Witch Time, which automatically slows time, and also enemies, whenever you dodge perfectly. Also, the music in this game is simply perfect. Moving on to yet another banger game, Nier Replicant. This masterpiece of a game released in 2010 is tied to Dragon Guard and Nier Automata. To get the boring stuff out of the way first, it's a hack and slash game that doesn't introduce many new ideas and feels similar to Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. The most innovative thing is probably the flying book, which allows you to use ranged attacks and spells. Also, as it's classic for many Japanese games, it's more of a semi-open world with main and side quests, as well as traditional weapon crafting and upgrading. Now let's get to the interesting part, the characters and the story. The main character is called Nier? Well, that's interesting. Anyways, Nier wants to find a way to cure sister Yona from a deadly disease called the Black Scroll. Whether their plan succeeds or not, I leave it up to you to discover. Please go into this game without any spoilers, I beg you. The book I mentioned earlier isn't just an object, it's actually alive. He's called Grimoire Wise and is an ancient magical book. Trust me, it just makes sense. Also, his voice actor is somewhat familiar. Then there's Kaine, an aggressive woman who swears all the time and could beat you up really easily. I could have shortened this and just called her the perfect wife, but whatever. We've also got a boy with a lot of magical powers and the ability to turn people into stone, Emil, who wears the same mask that Yoko Taro always wears. And of course we shouldn't forget to mention the twins Devila and Popola. As you may have noticed, I barely went into depth with these characters, and that's simply because I don't think it's really relevant for this video, since I'm focusing on the games themselves and not the lore or philosophy. Yoko Taro's games are just way too deep and really deserve their own videos to be done justice. Moving on to Metal Gear Rising. This game, produced by Konami in 2013, is a real hack and slash classic, and probably even your grandma is aware of it. Unlike any Metal Gear Solid game, this one is anything but stealthy and is instead full of action. This and the fact that Raiden's character feels butchered and has almost nothing to do with his MGS2 former self anymore is explained by the simple fact that this is not a Kojima game. So in Metal Gear Rising you play as Raiden from Metal Gear Solid 2, but now he's a cyborg and his character is oddly butchered. Raiden now works for a private military organization protecting African states from all sorts of dangers. The antagonists in this game are Desperado Enforcement LLC, which is also a private military company that uses war as a method to earn money. So in contrast to other modern hack and slash games we've covered, it's a very serious game with a strong war and political setting, which of course makes sense since we're talking about Metal Gear Solid here. This game rewards being offensive and aggressive with your playstyle, and honestly, with this banger OST, how could you do anything else? Really though, I think Metal Gear Rising has to be the top 10 games with the best OSTs. Every antagonist in this game, who also ends up as a boss later, is pretty interesting and well written. The game is really fun, although personally I had my issues with this stupid fucking ass cat from the early game. Anyways, besides people who are fans of Metal Gear Solid 2 and who are not gonna like what they did with Raiden, this game is generally well received and quite popular. I almost don't want to close out this game because its music is way too good. So 1 year later in 2014, Bayonetta 2 releases. This game really pains me. I mean, I guess it's fair since Nintendo saved the franchise from dying, but come on, no PC port is fucking atrocious. It's Bloodborne all over again. Bayonetta 2 follows a much more basic and straightforward story than the first game, and it basically goes like this. Woman gets dragged to the Inferno, Bayonetta goes to save her, and you now have to fight a god. This game is said to be way smoother in gameplay than the first entry, with witch time being an even bigger thing. I wish I could say more about this game, but oh well, fuck me I guess. Now we reach my personal peak of hack and slash games. In 2017, Yoko Taro releases his best game in my opinion, Nier Automata. Nier Automata takes place after the events of both Drakengard and Nier Replicant. You start playing as 2B, which I'm sure you all know, but in classic Yoko Taro style that switches depending on the point in the story. The gameplay is smooth and classic modern hack and slash. The idea of a flying book from Replicant was reused, but this time you fire with a drone. So what is the story about? Being set roughly thousands of years after Replicant, humanity is almost completely extinct and all the main characters are androids that fight rogue robots. This sounds incredibly simple for what I think is not only the best story in gaming history, but the best story that I have ever encountered anywhere, literally. The amount of meaning and philosophical messages in this game is unmatched by anything and probably ever will be. This game doesn't just talk about what we refer to as humanity, it literally embodies the act of questioning that concept. The entire time you spend playing this amazing story with these human-like androids and also some robots you meet along the way completely blurs what you perceive as human. What does it even mean to be human at all? And what purpose does it even serve to be human when I perceive things that technically aren't even human as equal? Does one even need to be human to be loved and have a fitting place in this world? That's a question I'm sure you're going to have after playing this game. And this isn't the only topic the game explores. It also dives into how one can find meaning in their own existence, how the boundaries of what we consider alive are completely made up, how endless cycles are literal hell on earth, and how one can find their own purpose in life. I'm trying to keep this short since I plan to make multiple videos just on Nier Automata, but the amount of deep meaning in this game is almost infinite. The world building on top of that is just perfect. The beautiful scenery and the incredibly fitting OST, sung in a made up language, really lets you fully indulge in its own world. That said, this game is very, very depressing and you will probably bawl your eyes out by the end, but it's worth it. Even something as simple as the credits carry an unbelievable amount of meaning. I genuinely believe that playing Nier Automata makes you a better person. Really. This game is perfect in my eyes, and the sense of self-improvement I felt after playing it was such a huge reward. This game takes a bit of money from you and in return gives you something very precious and priceless. In 2019, Capcom released what appears to be the last Devil May Cry. For now, right? Devil May Cry 5 is what I believe is the best hack and slash game gameplay wise. Even though I think Nier Automata is unbeatable when it comes to writing and story, DMC5 is still just a very, very good time. The gameplay is incredibly fun and diverse. since you not only have different weapons but also 3 whole different characters, even 4 if you count the Virgil DLC. If you want to have a good action game, just play DMC5. The fact that the perfect OST syncs up with you reaching a high style rank is such a good idea, and it encourages you even more to play well. Between different game modes, multiple difficulties and the Virgil DLC, you really shouldn't get bored easily. That said though, this game is unfortunately very short, and it disappointed me quite a bit. But I guess that only shows how good it is, and you don't really want it to end. The story revolves around this big demon tower, which seems a bit familiar, and Dante's first reunion with Virgil since the events of Devil May Cry 1. It's not a complex story at all, but it doesn't need to be, and I don't think that's DMC's goal in the slightest. It just wants you to have a good time, and you will definitely have that. Coming to the last game on this list, we have Stellar Blade, released in 2024. For the first time in this video, we are featuring a game made by a Korean studio, which honestly seems pretty rare since I can't name any other Korean game. I forgot about Inzoi. This game feels very similar to Nier Automata in its vibe. It's about androids, the mystery of humanity's extinction, and you know the drill. It's not badly written at all, but obviously it doesn't compare to Nier Automata in terms of writing. The gameplay on the other hand is what I believe to be the strong point of Stellar Blade. What's most interesting about this game is that it has actual good parrying added to the gameplay. Parrying combined with satisfying animations when you time certain actions correctly is instant dopamine feedback for skill, and it feels really rewarding to use what you've learned. The bosses in this game are really fun too, and the open world is very enjoyable and full of pretty scenery. The only thing I found a bit tiring were some of the side missions and also some of the main missions, so I'd say the flaws are mostly in the pacing. Other than that, this game is really good, and don't listen to people who call it a Guna game. It is crucial that she's caked up. So after reviewing all these games, we can see where hack and slash as a genre comes from and how far it has come. It's a genre that's barely recognizable compared to its ancestors, and that's a huge amount of progress. Personally, I like hack and slash, but I'm not overly fond of it compared to other genres. But just for franchises like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, I'll always be thankful that this genre came to exist. And especially because of Nier Automata, I can't really find any negatives about this genre at all. So I guess all we can do now is hope that DMC6 releases sometime before Resident Evil 25 Remastered, and that Yoko Taro finds a way to shatter my heart once again. Also, I just realized Bayonetta 3 exists. I didn't fucking know that.